fog rolls into San Francisco with a life of its own, forcing its way through the steep streets and curling around the ornate Victorian structures that define the city skyline. Amongst these architectural marvels sits a building that exudes an elegance trapped in time, known to the locals as the Queen Anne Hotel. This is not merely a place for travelers to rest their heads, but a repository of secrets buried deep within its redwood walls and velvet-lined corridors. The structure looms on Sutter Street like a sentinel watching over the Pacific Heights neighborhood with a gaze that feels both welcoming and intensely watchful. Shadows stretch long across the wooden floors, even when the sun is at its highest point, suggesting that something unseen walks alongside the living. Visitors often pause at the entrance, feeling a sudden drop in temperature that has nothing to do with the cool bay breeze. Those who step across the threshold of the Queen Anne Hotel are immediately transported back to the late 19th century, a time of gas lights and horse-drawn carriages. The air inside is heavy with the scent of polished wood and old books, a perfume that seems to mask a lingering sadness. It is a sadness that permeates the very foundation of the building, originating from a woman whose heart and soul were poured into every cornice and pillar. While the hotel today boasts modern amenities, the atmosphere refuses to yield to the present day, remaining stubbornly anchored in the era of bustles and waistcoats. Guests frequently report the sensation of being watched from the top of the grand staircase, or seeing fleeting movements in their peripheral vision. It is here, in this beautifully preserved monument to the past, that the line between history and the paranormal becomes terrifyingly thin. To understand the haunting one must first understand the history of the land and the people who shaped it, specifically a man named James Graham Fair, known as one of the Silver Kings of the Comstock Lode. James Graham Fair was a man of immense wealth and power, whose influence stretched far beyond the mines of Nevada. He was a United States Senator and a titan of industry, but his personal life was fraught with scandal and whisperings of illicit affairs. In the year 1890, James Graham Fair commissioned the construction of a magnificent building on Sutter Street, intended to be a finishing school for girls. The sheer opacity of his wealth allowed for no expense to be spared, creating a masterpiece of Queen Anne architecture that would rival any structure on the West Coast. However, rumors swirled through San Francisco society that the school was more than just a philanthropic gesture. At the center of these rumors stood Miss Mary, like a woman of poise and education, who would become the headmistress of the prestigious school. Society whispered that she was more than just an educator to the wealthy senator, but perhaps his mistress, holding a place in his affections that his wife did not. Miss Mary Lake was a woman dedicated to the etiquette and education of young women, striving to create an environment of safety and refinement in a rough and tumbling city. The school opened with great fanfare, catering to the daughters of the elite, who were sent there to learn the arts of being a proper lady. Miss Mary Lake took residence in the building, ensuring that every detail of the operation met her exacting standards. Her office was room 410, a space that would eventually become the epicenter of the supernatural activity. For 6 years, the school flourished under the guidance of Miss Mary Lake, filled with the laughter and studious silence of high society girls. The building hummed with life as piano notes drifted down the hallways, and the rustle of silk skirts brushed against the wainscoting. Miss Mary Lake loved the school and her students with a fierce devotion, considering the building her true home and sanctuary. However, financial difficulties and shifting societal tides began to erode the stability of the institution, despite the best efforts of the headmistress. The panic of 1893 had taken its toll on many wealthy families, and enrollment began to dwindle, causing great distress to Miss Mary Lake. She fought valiantly to keep the doors open, pouring her own energy and spirit into the failing enterprise. But fate had already cast its dark shadow. By the year 1896, the school for girls was forced to close its doors, forever marking the end of an era for Miss Mary Lake. The closure broke her heart as she watched her beloved students leave, and the halls fall into a heavy silence that felt like a tomb. It is said that Miss Mary Lake died shortly after the school closed, though records of her exact end remain somewhat murky and shrouded in mystery. Some say she died of a broken heart, unable to bear the loss of her life work and the separation from the building she loved so dearly. The structure changed hands multiple times over the following decades, serving as a gentleman club and later a boarding house for young women. Yet through all these changes, the spirit of the headmistress never truly departed from the premises, choosing instead to linger. The building eventually fell into disrepair during the mid-20th century, mirroring the decline of many Victorian treasures in the city. It stood vacant and neglected for years, with peeling paint and shattered windows that looked like hollow eyes staring out at the changing city. Squatters and vagrants occasionally sought shelter within its walls, sharing stories of a stern woman in Victorian dress who would chase them away. It was not until the 1980s that a group of investors recognized the potential of the dilapidated structure and began a massive restoration project. They sought to return the building to its former glory, meticulously restoring the woodwork and the stained glass windows. As the renovation work began, so did the reports of unexplained phenomena start to increase among the construction crew working late into the night. Carpenters and electricians reported tools vanishing from their belts, only to reappear in the center of the room hours later, neatly arranged. Ladders would shift on their own, and heavy doors would slam shut when there was no draft to cause such movement. The workers often felt a stern presence looking over their shoulders, as if a supervisor was inspecting their craftsmanship with a critical eye. One painter claimed to see the reflection of a woman with a high collar and severe bun in a freshly installed mirror. When he turned around, the room was empty, but the air was freezing cold despite the summer heat. The restoration team joked nervously about the ghost of the headmistress, but fear was evident in their hurried pace as dusk approached. They knew they were intruders in a house that already had a master. When the Queen Anne Hotel finally opened its doors to the public, the hauntings transitioned from the playful to the personal. Guests checking into room 410, the former suite of Miss Mary Lake, began to report the most consistent activity. This room is spacious and elegant, featuring a large 4-poster bed and antique furnishings that reflect the style of the 1890s. It is a beautiful room by all accounts, yet many who enter feel an immediate sense of intrusion, as if they have walked into a private conversation. Travelers unpacking their suitcases would turn their backs for a moment, only to find their clothes neatly folded on the bed. Items left scattered on the dresser would be reorganized in a precise manner, suggestive of a woman who values order above all else. The encounters in room 410 are not always limited to the movement of inanimate objects. Many guests have woken in the middle of the night to the sensation of being tucked into bed by unseen hands. They describe the feeling of the blankets being pulled up gently around their shoulders and smoothed down with maternal care. It is a terrifying contradiction to feel comforted by a ghost, and many guests flee the room in a panic, despite the benevolent nature of the act. The touch is described as cool, but firm, accompanied often by the faint scent of lavender or old parchment. Some have even reported hearing a soft, humming sound, a lullaby from a bygone era, drifting through the stillness of the room. It is as if Miss Mary Lake does not realize her students are gone and continues her duties. A particularly chilling account comes from a businessman who stayed in the hotel during a rainy November night in 2005. He was a skeptic who scoffed at the idea of ghosts and had requested room 410 specifically to prove a point. He spent the evening working on his laptop, mocking the stories he had read in the guest book located in the lobby. As the clock struck midnight, the temperature in the room plummeted, causing him to see his own breath misting in the air. The lights in the room began to flicker violently, casting long, erratic shadows that danced across the flocked wallpaper. He tried to dismiss it as faulty wiring, but the atmosphere had grown thick and oppressive, making it difficult to breathe. The businessman stood up to adjust the thermostat, but stopped dead in his tracks when he saw the rocking chair in the corner moving. It was a slow, rhythmic motion back and forth on the hardwood floor, creating a creaking sound that echoed loudly. There was no one sitting in the chair, yet the cushion depressed, as if bearing the weight of a person. He watched in frozen horror as the chair turned slowly to face him, the movement deliberate and controlled. A sudden pressure built in his ears, similar to the feeling of descending in an airplane, and a wave of extreme sadness washed over him. He felt an overwhelming urge to weep a sorrow that was not his own, but was being projected onto him by an unseen force. He retreated to the bed, pulling the covers up, as a childlike fear took hold of his rational adult mind. The room fell silent again, but the air remained charged with static electricity, making the hair on his arms stand up. He closed his eyes, trying to force himself to sleep, when he felt the mattress depress beside him. It was the distinct sensation of someone sitting down on the edge of the bed right next to his legs. He held his breath, too terrified to open his eyes or move a muscle as the presence shifted its weight. Then he felt a hand brush against his cheek, cold and dry like autumn leaves, followed by a whispered hush. The voice was female and sounded right next to his ear, commanding him to sleep in a tone that brokered no argument. This encounter lasted until the first light of dawn broke through the heavy velvet curtains, dispelling the shadows in the room. The businessman packed his bags in record time, not bothering to shower or shave before rushing down to the front desk. He checked out 3 days early, refusing to give a reason to the clerk. Although his pale face said it all, he is not the only one to leave the Queen Anne Hotel earlier than expected due to the activities of the headmistress. The staff has grown accustomed to seeing guests in the lobby in the early hours of the morning, asking for a room change. They speak in hushed tones about the lady on the 4th floor, nodding knowingly as the guests recount their experiences, while room 410 is the heart of the haunting. The influence of Miss Mary Lake extends throughout the entire hotel. In the library, visitors have reported books flying off the shelves or opening to specific pages dealing with etiquette and history. Guests sitting by the fireplace have felt cold spots move through the room, as if someone is walking past them quickly. The staff often finds the furniture in the lobby rearranged during the night, with chairs turned to face the window or placed in a circle. It seems that Miss Mary Lake still wishes to hold court, ensuring that her establishment remains up to her high standards. She is a diligent spirit one who takes her responsibilities seriously, even in death, never resting from her eternal work. There are also reports of a different energy in the dining room, one that is less maternal and more disciplinary. A waitress working the breakfast shift once dropped a tray of silverware and immediately felt a sharp tug on her hair. It was a punitive yank, similar to how a strict teacher might admonish a clumsy student in the 19th century. She turned around expecting to see a manager, but the room was completely empty save for the tables set for breakfast. The air around her was freezing, and she heard a sharp intake of breath, a sound of disapproval manifesting from thin air. Since that day, the staff is exceptionally careful when setting tables, ensuring every fork and spoon is perfectly aligned. They know that the mistress of the house is watching, and she does not tolerate sloppy work. One fateful evening, a group of paranormal investigators checked into the Queen Anne Hotel, armed with cameras and voice recorders. They were determined to capture definitive proof of the afterlife and set up their equipment in the hallway outside room 410. As the night progressed, their equipment began to malfunction, with batteries draining instantly and cameras turning off without cause. They sat in the dark hallway, asking questions into the silence, hoping for an electronic voice phenomenon response. Suddenly, a heavy antique mirror hanging on the wall unhooked itself and crashed to the floor, shattering into 1,000 pieces. The crash was deafening in the quiet hotel, waking guests on the floor below and sending the investigators scrambling back. The investigators were shaken, but continued their vigil, moving inside the infamous room 410 to confront the entity directly. One of the team members, a sensitive named Sarah, claimed she could see a woman standing by the window. She described the spirit as wearing a high-collared dark dress with her hair pulled back tightly, looking out at the street below. Sarah said the woman looked incredibly lonely and was weeping softly, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The team tried to communicate, asking why she was sad, but the spirit did not acknowledge their presence. It seemed she was trapped in a loop of her own memory, reenacting a moment of grief from her life. The sadness in the room became unbearable, forcing two of the investigators to leave to catch their breath. As the clock neared 3 a.m, the activity in the room intensified beyond anything the team had anticipated. The heavy curtains began to sway violently, as if a strong wind was blowing inside the sealed room. The temperature dropped to near freezing, and frost began to form on the metal casing of their equipment. A loud banging sound erupted from inside the closet, sounding like fists pounding against the wood from the interior. The doorknob of the closet rattled furiously, turning back and forth as something tried to escape. The investigators backed into the corner, watching in terror as the closet door slowly creaked open. Inside there was nothing but darkness, yet the feeling of a presence was stronger than ever. From the darkness of the closet, a voice emerged, clear and audible, without the need for recording equipment. It was a stern female voice that commanded them to leave her sanctuary immediately. The command was not shouted, but spoken with an icy authority that chilled them to the bone. At the same moment, the lights in the room exploded, sending sparks showering down onto the carpet. The team grabbed their gear and fled the room, stumbling over each other in the dark hallway. They did not stop running until they reached the street outside, gasping for air in the foggy San Francisco night. They had sought a ghost, but had found a force of will that was far too powerful to challenge. The footage they captured that night was mostly corrupted, but one audio file remained intact, containing the voice from the closet. When played back, the voice did not sound demonic or evil, but incredibly tired and annoyed. It was the voice of a woman who simply wanted peace and order in her home, and was tired of the intrusion. The investigators never returned to the Queen Anne Hotel, having learned a valuable lesson about respect. They realized that some hauntings are not just echoes of the past, but active intelligences that demand boundaries. Miss Mary Lake was not a spectacle to be hunted, but a resident to be respected. Her spirit was as much a part of the building as the bricks and mortar. Despite the fear she instills, there is a strange protective quality to the hauntings of Miss Mary Lake. There have been instances where guests have tripped on the stairs, only to feel a hand steady them, preventing a fall. A young woman staying alone reported feeling a comforting hand on her back while she was crying over a personal tragedy. It seems that the headmistress still possesses a deep well of compassion for those in her care, provided they follow the rules. She is a complex spirit capable of both terror and tenderness, much like the living woman must have been. She guards the hotel against disrespect, but offers solace to the weary traveler who treats her home with dignity. The locals of Pacific Heights have their own stories about the Queen Anne Hotel, often seen from the sidewalk. Neighbors walking their dogs late at night have reported seeing a silhouette in the fourth floor window, watching them. The figure stands perfectly still, staring out into the fog with an intensity that makes passers-by quicken their pace. Some claim to have seen the curtains part and a pale face press against the glass before vanishing. It is a reminder that while the city around the hotel changes and evolves, the Queen Anne remains a capsule of the past. The spirit inside refuses to move on, holding onto her territory with a grip that death could not loosen. Skeptics argue that the creaks and drafts are simply the result of an old building settling and the fog playing tricks on the mind. They claim that the power of suggestion fuels the ghost stories, and that Mary Lake is nothing more than a legend. Yet even the most hardened skeptics often find their resolve testing after a night in room 410. There is an atmosphere in that room that defies logical explanation, a heaviness that presses down on the chest. It is the weight of history, the accumulation of emotions from a woman who loved and lost within those walls. Science can explain drafts and settling wood. But it cannot explain the feeling of being tucked into bed. The management of the Queen Anne Hotel embraces the history while trying to maintain a functioning business for tourists. They do not advertise it as a haunted house attraction, preferring to focus on the Victorian charm and hospitality. However, they cannot deny the experiences of their guests and the entries in the logbooks. They treat the topic with a respectful distance, acknowledging the stories without sensationalizing them. The staff is trained to handle frightened guests, with empathy often moving them to a room on a lower floor. They know that arguing with a terrified guest is futile when the evidence of their fear is so visceral. One former employee who worked the night shift for 10 years shared his experiences in a local history blog. He described nights where the elevator would go up to the 4th floor and open its doors with no one inside. He would watch the security monitors and see orbs of light floating down the main staircase. He spoke of the smell of old roses that would suddenly fill the lobby at 3 in the morning, the favorite flower of Miss Mary Lake. He claimed that he never felt threatened, but always felt observed, as if he was being evaluated. He eventually left the job, not because of fear, but because he felt he could never truly be alone in the building. The legacy of the Queen Anne Hotel is inextricably linked to the tragic figure of Miss Mary Lake and her school. It serves as a physical monument to her life and her failure, and perhaps that is why she stays. She is bound to the location not by a curse, but by her own unfinished business and emotional attachment. She spent her life trying to create a perfect world for her students, and in death, she continues that impossible task. The hotel is her eternal project, her never-ending responsibility that keeps her tethered to the earth. She wanders the halls, checking the locks, straightening the paintings, and ensuring that all is well. For those brave enough to visit the Queen Anne Hotel, the experience is more than just a stay. It is a brush with history. It is a chance to step into the world of the late 19th century and perhaps meet its matriarch. Whether one believes in ghosts or not, the atmosphere of the hotel is undeniable and leaves a lasting impression. It is a place where the past is not dead, but merely waiting in the shadows of the corridor. The creak of the floorboard outside your door might be another guest, or it might be the headmistress on her rounds. In the silence of the night, every sound is amplified, and every shadow holds a potential secret. As the fog wraps around the turret of the Queen Anne Hotel, obscuring it from the modern world, the legend continues to grow. New guests arrive every day unaware that they are checking into a domain ruled by the dead. They wheel their suitcases across the lobby floor under the watchful gaze of the unseen presence. Some will sleep soundly, while others will leave with stories that they will tell for the rest of their lives. The Queen Anne Hotel stands as a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit, even after the body has failed. It remains one of the most active and poignant hauntings in San Francisco, a true Victorian mystery. So if you find yourself walking down Sutter Street on a misty evening, look up at the windows of the Queen Anne. You might see the flicker of a light where no light should be, or the movement of a curtain. And if you choose to stay the night in room 410, remember to mind your manners. Hang up your clothes and keep your voice down, for Miss Mary Lake is watching. And if you wake up to find your blankets tucked tight around you, do not scream. Simply close your eyes and accept the comfort from a woman who only wants to care for her guests, even from beyond the grave.